Hey, Guoba here. It's been a long time since you last saw me, but today it's time to talk about the new Golden Companion Shop Edition. In 4.2, you'll be able to pick up Robin and Huohuo alongside the previous gang of Ruan Mei, Luocha, and Topaz, and they're giving out a spirit for free, so it's time to talk about who to get. I don't think I did a video on Topaz because it's kind of useless, but now we got some spice going. Anyway, let's dive into the best picks in the current meta as well as potential eidolon chasing. Now, of course, before anything, if you like a certain character a lot, feel free to pick them over meta, but this video is going to be speaking about meta value. And a second thing to take into consideration is if you don't need any of these units or their eidolons. In that case, you can do what a lot of people did in the previous installments and just save until a unit you want gets added. So, we now have Luocha, Ruan Mei, Topaz, Huohuo, and Robin in the shop. Technically, every standard unit is also in the shop, but there's only one specific time I'd ever consider that, and we'll talk about that in the end. Anyways, let's begin with Topaz, who unfortunately I would ignore meta-wise. Her niche is simply face out teams right now, and even in them, she is far from the best choice. Other follow-up teams are too weak to consider, and Ashville is a top clearer but doesn't want her in his carry teams. There's really not much else to say. We'll have to wait and see if any future teams want her, but it's unlikely. Because of her niche and weak performance, I wouldn't even consider getting a potential eidolon on her either. Luocha has slightly more value than her, I'd say, because he at least is a sustain that can run in nearly any team just fine. He does his job mostly well and is still one of the strongest when it comes to raw healing output. However, DHPT was free, so an old sustain pick is already slightly undervalued, but on top of that, Huohuo just got added to the shop. She's getting memed on in the community, but her consistent sustain is not bad now. She just has a problem with one-shot prevention, which Luocha also has. He has better SP economy if equal in sustain power, since you're likely skilling on her for her ult anyway, and he has a better burst of emergency healing for single target, but not in AoE. If you're aiming for a stronger clear and the stage doesn't one-tap you, then she at least offers attack percent and energy versus his nothing really. So it would be between Ruan Mei, Robin, and Huohuo with a potential contender at the end. First, let's talk about Ruan Mei. Ruan Mei did get kicked out of the meta break team with the release of the Dahlia, where a team of Firefly, Fugue, Harmony, MC Dahlia was just stronger most of the time than Ruan Mei in any one spot. She can't DDD spam like Harmony MC, she can't provide super break multipliers, and her weakness break efficiency is nice but no longer unique. Now, if you don't have Fugue, well, getting Ruan Mei can help fill up that slot so you don't need to pull her at all. Likewise, if you don't have the MC free to use their Harmony form, she can replace their slot. But also, if at E1 Ruan Mei, she's a fantastic option in the full Firefly Sustainers team pre-E2. This is partly thanks to Firefly's reliance on super break multipliers being reduced post Novaflare, making the raw amp from E1 Ruan Mei more desirable. Finally, outside of break, she remains useful as a generic support for underinvested teams. You don't have Tribi or Cyrene for your Caster's team, Ruan Mei works there. You don't have Finance best non-Cyrene team, Ruan Mei can slot in. Her weakness break efficiency is also universally strong in Apocalyptic Shadow for any of these teams. And with anomaly requiring 3 teams, having a generic support like Ruan Mei is awesome. And since most people probably have her, that E1 also being generically strong is cool too for the same teams. I would not go past E1 though, as E2 is pretty terrible in break and pretty niche outside of it, and E4 is useless. Now, on the less generic side of things, because of 3.x's HP meta, and now elation, we have Robin. Similarly to Ruan Mei, she can be placed as a support in many teams, it's just they're going to have to be attack scaling this time. Her team-wide advanced forward remains unique and potent, and her amping is still powerful or even top tier when considering multiple carries. Her kit is still strong on paper, but they released carries that just didn't care for her kit, and if they did a little, well, these units got synergistic replacements that took Robin's spot. In 3.x, half the carries were HP, and 2 strong users of Robin back on their releases were Anax and Finan. And that spot got joinked by better units like Saridra and then Cyrene comps. Elation then doesn't care for attack, and Ashville, who does skill on attack, doesn't want her in his hypercarry teams as he prefers ally attack frequency. She's still used with Fei Xiao, used with Ashville dual carry, used with Saber, used with the Glyce sometimes, and used with Finan rarely, and she can be used with most attack carries. So just like with Ruan Mei, if you need a generic buffer but this time on the attack side, I'd recommend picking her up for one of your teams. If you're an older player, you likely aren't needing her though. Then we have her E1, which is fantastic, a stronger upgrade numerically than E1 Ruan Mei if you're using both already. And with it, you can start seeing her become higher priority in teams. If you want to use her again, then this can be a worthwhile pickup. If you're currently using her, even better. E2 is also much better than it used to be since we have more teams that could fit in an extra action in Concerto, and that 16% speed helps a lot to get to it. One example is getting Sparkle to 180 in an Archer team, allowing for an extra arrow spamming Concerto for Archer, which is a great amount of buffing. The energy regen buff is also clutch for weaker attack frequency teams that just want to use her for all those big amp effects. And finally, we have Huohuo. Her Novaflare did not address her weak sustaining power really, it got better, but in harder content like Anomaly Arbitration, she still suffers since she doesn't have damage mitigation in any way, and her kit mostly remains unchanged. However, even before the Nova, she sees decent usage thanks to her unique utility as an energy gifting sustain, especially with the fact that it can work on the whole team. Now, if you need one-shot prevention, attack frequency, or you run a HV team, you're not going to run Huohuo, but otherwise, she's great. Despite all the Doom posting, she does sustain fine into a lot of content. It's just even with the Nova, she can't be used everywhere, and content where she does do fine is getting harder and harder as the game naturally progresses. And because she got her Novaflare now in 4.2, it's very unlikely she'll get anything to truly elevate her sustain in the future when she stops being usable. But I'd be surprised if we reach that point anytime soon, and I guess she'd still act as an in-between of a support and a healer for when you need some healing to not die, but some buffing and utility as well. Anyways, for teams, Elation specifically really likes her right now despite the attack buff being mostly useless because of that energy. Elation units have high energy costs, presumably because of the Elation skill mechanic, but that doesn't really generate much. Either way, Yao Guang is at the center of the Elation meta, and her 180 energy cost really appreciates Huohuo, each ult giving the whole Elation team an Elation skill. If you don't have Yao Guang Sig, then she's especially powerful for her. And more Sparksy ults means more ult damage, but also thrill points, which means more punchline and damage. Elation MC being able to dupe an Elation skill more frequently thanks to Huohuo is awesome too. And Evanescence is ult focused, so among sustains it looks like Huohuo is the best until a conveniently OP Elation sustain or something comes along. Outside of Elation, you have Dot, who can still use her despite some anti-synergy, like her not being able to proc Kafka follow-ups in harder hitting fights, and her energy being wasted on Kafka in her best build. But the energy for High Ceilings and Black Swan is decent. Classic Saber and Aglaia teams still like her, and will be getting even more attack percent post Novaflare, and any future energy carry will like her too. I'm surprised her energy sustaining niche still hasn't been replaced yet, but maybe that's why she's in the shop. Finally, E1 is pretty cool for a sustain to have with its 12% speed buff. We also get some healing bonus, which is kinda needed. The talent extension is cosmetic though. Anyways, the speed can always be solid, but you have to build around it, and this is notably useful for Silverwolf's elation scaling traits, but also potential speed breakpoints on both her and Yao Guang. However, if you're only using Huohuo for your elation team, before using your spirits, consider the thought that an elation Hyacinth may come out and curb stomp her in power. Past D1, I would not recommend Huohuo eidolons either. So if you need to sustain, especially if you missed out on Dan Hong PT, well, Huohuo is here to help. You could pick her for a sustain slot in one of your 2 to 3 teams, or Ruan Mei or Robin as a support in those teams. It's really a choose what you need situation. Huohuo and Elation, Ruan Mei and Firefly, Robin and attack scaling comps. All 3 of these units' E1s are either strong upgrades in damage or in utility, and so they are also top picks if you want to upgrade their performance in your teams. I think I would prioritize Huohuo E1 the least though. But for older players, you might not need any of these picks, even with the E1s, and so remember again, you can easily save your companion spirit for the future and eventually get an E6 5-star that you love or something. Now, before we finish the video, there is a final possibility of using your spirit for a specific standard unit, and that is Novaflare Welt. First off, remember, you can lose to standard units, but you can also pull them passively in the standard banner, so using a spirit for one of them is extremely risky when you could eventually just drop the eidolon you desire. Secondly, the only time I'd consider it is if you specifically have E3 Welt already and want to pick up his E4, which got a massive glow up with his Novaflare in 4.2. At E4, he's one of the best sustainer supports and for many teams, including the new Silverwolf 999 elation comp. And so with that alone, his E4 could be more meta relevant than anything else in the shop, depending on your account. I wouldn't get his E2 if you don't have it, despite it being important for him supporting teams, because he still won't be top tier for supporting. I also wouldn't get his E6. E4, however, buffs all of his archetypes and is technically the strongest eidolon numerically that you can get in this shop, and it truly allows him to be a great generic support / pseudo sustain. But anyways, let me know who you will end up picking down below, and I hope this video helps you make that choice. Thank you to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a Guoba day.